there. Thank you.
There we go. All right, so I think we are all set and we're live here now on YouTube as well. So thank you so much, Angie, for joining us here on the Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. So I think perhaps maybe you can give us a brief introduction and all the amazing things you've been doing and share with my students and those listening as well what you've been up to. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you. So my name is Anjie Vichayanonda, and I am a trademark and copyright lawyer in America. And I launched my own startup a couple of years ago that's focused on mentoring prospective law students and people who are interested in pursuing legal careers here in the United States. And basically, we provide a mentoring program that helps them connect to attorneys who can mentor them and show them more about what in the world the legal profession is all about before they decide if they want to invest all that time and money in law school. So I basically host meetups and events for pre-law students, current law students, lawyers, and all sorts of legal professionals to connect with each other. We've been promoting those events on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much every social media channel. And so now we have people attending our events from all over. You guys are always welcome to attend our events as well if you would like to connect with more legal professionals and learn about different practice areas. Every single week we invite in lawyers on Tuesdays and Thursdays to talk to students about their practice areas and career paths. So if you want more of this, feel free to come to our events too.
So what gave you kind of the idea, or where did you make that transition from what you're doing in your practice there in law, as well as now focusing on the mentorship aspect?
Yeah, well, when I decided to go to law school, I really had no idea what I was doing. That's pretty much the idea. So I'm a first generation Asian American. I am a Thai Texan. So my parents were from Thailand. I was born in Texas, and I had no idea I wanted to go to law school until I was already out working in the real world. So I was graduated college, was working in an advertising agency for a couple of years, and the recession in the US hit and I got laid off, and I had to figure out, do I want to pursue this career more or do I want to pursue a different path? And so I became interested in law school and really didn't know how to connect with lawyers at all, or anyone in the legal profession, actually. All my parents were engineers, and nobody in my family was a lawyer. They didn't know any lawyers here. And so I kept thinking, how do I connect with professionals in the industry that I wanted to go into to learn more about what career paths I could even pursue? And so I thought, I'm really good at cold calling. My very first job was cold calling sales. And so I got really good at accepting rejection and being ignored. And so I decided to cold call some lawyers. And so I literally took the phone book, flipped it open to lawyers, and cold called over 50 lawyers in Dallas-Fort Worth. And as you can imagine, my odds for actually reaching someone were not too high. Out of over 50 lawyers, I actually only got to speak to 3. And 2 of them took phone calls with me, taught me a little bit about their practice areas. And then one of them took me out to lunch. And he listened to me tell him about me trying to connect with all these lawyers. And he thought that was the craziest thing he had ever heard because he actually hadn't, thought that people would have the courage to reach out to that many lawyers and try to learn more about the profession that way. And so he said, you know what? I want to help you. I want to mentor you and take you under my wing. And why don't you come work for me as a paralegal while you're applying to law school? And however long that takes, if you decide you want to go this year or next year or whenever. And so I said, okay, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So I went to go work for him, and he promised to introduce me to tons of other lawyers because he was very involved in the bar associations that he was part of. He was very involved in the community and knew a ton of lawyers. And so he literally introduced me to dozens and dozens of lawyers, and he taught me what to say to them because I was really terrified of speaking to lawyers at first. I really had no idea what questions to ask them. How do I even learn about their career paths when I didn't know anything about any single practice area at all? I mean, most people who are thinking about going to law school or getting into the legal industry, most people have had very little exposure to any type of law, whether it's criminal law, employment law, any type of law. So it's actually pretty intimidating at first when you're trying to think about how do I start reaching out to people in the industry. And so John really taught me what questions to ask. And he sat me down and he asked me, Angie, do you understand what an in-house lawyer does? And I said, not really. And he said, an in-house lawyer works inside of a company, and the company will come to you with 99 problems in all sorts of different areas. And you have to know just enough about each little problem to be able to find lawyers who can help solve these problems, whether that's outside counsel or whether that's you figuring out the legal problem or whatever it is. And so he said, most of my job is getting to know other lawyers and what they do enough so that I can figure out if I want to hire them, if they're going to do good work for my client, if they can help us solve this problem. And so he said, this is my list of 45 questions that I ask to every lawyer that I meet. And I want you to take this list, cross off anything that you don't really understand or it's too technical or it asks about fees, take off all that stuff. And then I want you to add what I call rapport building questions. And he said, you're just at the very beginning of your journey. So you really need to learn what other people's journeys actually look like. Don't just focus on the end game. Don't just focus on what do they do right now in this moment. You need to learn what is the entire path that they took to get to from point A to point B. And so he said, ask them questions like, when did you know you wanted to become a lawyer? Did you know when you were 5, 20, 25, 35? Because all of those different periods in your life may really change all your considerations on why you want to pursue a different career path. And then ask them, how did they decide which schools to even apply to? How did they decide, which programs to pursue, which jobs to pursue once they got into law school? And how did they start really finding their first job after school? And so then you'll start to learn about how do people actually develop their own careers? How do they make these very human decisions? Because I think it's really easy when you're looking on LinkedIn or when you're looking at a law firm bio, you see these very successful professionals, and it can be very intimidating because you're like, wow, how did they get all of these credentials? And I don't have any of this. So how do I become these people? And so when you can talk to these people and ask them for informational interviews and learn more about their career paths, you can start to think about how do you want to shape your own career path. And so that's what we wanted to do with this mentoring program, was really help students connect with lawyers and show them how to build these relationships with their lawyers and build mentoring relationships. It's none of these things are very difficult, but they don't really come naturally. You would think that it's all common sense, but it's really not. Learning how to build your first professional relationships can be really difficult, and it can feel really awkward at first. So we really wanted to create a framework that made the students more comfortable to do that. So we go out, we find all the attorneys, we serve them up like fish in a barrel for you, and you can just go and ask all the questions that you want to them. And really, we have tons of resources. We have a career development plan that helps you diagnose where are you at in your career exploration? How much do you know about the profession? What do you not know about the profession? Because when you don't even know what you don't know, you can't go out and find the information. So we try to give you a roadmap of how do you start really thinking about where do you want to go, which practice areas are you interested in. And for paralegals, this is important too, because there's tons of different legal practice areas. And your job, if you're supporting a attorney that works in criminal law, may be very different than if you are supporting an attorney who works in intellectual property law, for example. So it's really important that you learn what all these different practice areas are all about. And I had no idea the hundreds of different practice areas that there were. I mean, when I started connecting with all these different lawyers, it was really eye-opening, how your life could be very different if you were a lawyer practicing in one area from another lawyer practicing in another area. There were some areas where, it's the stereotypical what you think about lawyers. You work all day and all night and you make a lot of money, but you sacrifice a lot of your life to do it. But then in other areas, it was a little bit more stable. It was a little more like a 9 to 5 job. But you have, different types of clients, and it's just a different lifestyle. So one of the things that you should really be thinking about throughout your career is what kind of lifestyle do you want to live? What are the things that are important to you, and what are your values? What type of work do you want to do for a living? And whether or not that comports with your values, and whether or not that aligns with exactly who you want to be. So when you talk to these professionals, you need to make sure that you're not just asking them about the job itself, but look at them holistically. Is this person happy? Do they look exhausted? Do they look stressed out? I mean, do you really see yourself being that person? Do you want to be that person? Or, if not, then figure out what it is that makes them unhappy so that you don't go down that road, right? Figure out if it's the work-life balance, just particularly in this practice area, is just very heavy, or is it this particular firm is really heavy, or is it an organizational thing, or is it a practice area thing? So there's lots of different things that you can do to connect with professionals, to start building your professional relationships with them, and use that to really explore different career paths. So that's what started all of it, and why we do the mentoring program the way that we do it. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you guys a little bit about, your own interests. So can you tell me in the chat box, how many of you have actually worked for a law firm or a legal employer of any sort? Just put yes or no in the chat box so I know kind of who all's out there, if you have any experience at all, or if you're brand new. Just put yes or no if you have experience or don't have experience. And and then on top of that, I want you to really think about, okay, so I'm not really sure exactly how it works in Canada, if you can practice as a paralegal without having a certification or not. But here in the US, depending on your state, sometimes you need a certification, sometimes you don't need a certification. So some people you can just dive in right away, and some people you actually have to get a certification before you can pursue it. But and John Paul, maybe you can tell me.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and clarify there. I think a lot of people, in Canada are familiar with, with suits and specifically Meghan Markle was a paralegal at one point, right? But in Ontario, I think it's the only jurisdiction in North America, if not the world, where paralegals can be licensed to provide legal services in their scope, like attorneys and lawyers. So, for example, we have a small claims court, which is $35,000 and less, and they can represent clients just like an attorney can. They can practice in criminal law. So, some kind of have the traditional support to lawyers and other paralegals and attorneys, whereas others will take on their own clients, start their own practice. So you get a big mix of that.
Sorry, is there a distinction between legal assistants and paralegals, or are they used interchangeably in your jurisdiction?
I think they're used interchangeably. I think some people, when they advertise for a paralegal, they may be looking for a legal assistant. But in Ontario, if you have the license as a paralegal, you can take on clients like an attorney can in the US. So it's unique in that perspective, because I know in the US, like you were saying, some have to get certified as paralegals, and some can just get the experience from working in a more of a legal assistant role. We also have what's called law clerks. I think you may have this similar thing there, where they're sort of certified in some avenues to do certain areas of assistance, like providing real estate support for a real estate attorney or lawyer. And we also use lawyer instead of attorney. So sometimes it gets a little confusing, but it's more or less, like I said, the same kind of concept. But for paralegals specifically, they can take on individual clients and disperse legal advice that they can't do anywhere else in the
Yeah,
world, I think.
wow, that's really impressive. Okay, great. Well, yeah, so it's actually, it's really important for you guys because you're going to have some pretty significant responsibilities in your job, that you really connect with professionals who are already practicing to learn more about what they do. So I would highly recommend, as soon as humanly possible, to start reaching out to professionals who, have walked in these career paths. And you can find them in all sorts of ways. So I'm sure there's professional associations for paralegals in Canada. I just Googled it earlier to see if there were any that I saw right off the bat. And it looks like there's the Canadian Association of Paralegals and the Paralegal Society of Canada. And I'm sure that there's a lot of local associations that you can join as well. But those are all great ways that you can start connecting with professionals and, attending the events, using their networking events to really find paralegals that you want to connect with. And it probably wouldn't even hurt to reach out to some lawyers too and just learn more about, some different practice areas. So I think it's really important for you to start thinking about what types of law that you might be interested in. Again, a paralegal who, for example, I practice trademark and copyright law. We use our paralegals in order to draft trademark applications. We also have litigation paralegals who help us file legal pleadings with courts and administrative bodies like the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So paralegals, in our firm would do both litigation and clearance work, prosecution, transactional work. But that's not the case for all practice areas. There are some practice areas where you're only going to do transactional work. There are some practice areas where you only do litigation work. And so that can make your lifestyle really different. For example, if you're doing transactional work, that stuff tends to be matter to matter. If you're helping somebody file a trademark application, the thing's not on fire, it doesn't need to go out the door probably today, it can probably be filed tomorrow. And so you can stack your life a little bit better when you're doing transactional law because it tends to be a little bit more predictable. On the other hand, when you're working in litigation, your time is not set by you. Your time is mostly driven by the courts. It's driven by opposing counsel, at least here where we have an adversarial system. So basically, usually when one side does something, it triggers an action on the other side. And so as soon as that clock starts to run, you're on the hook to file something. And that may mean that you're staying in the office all night to make sure that it happens so that you can file it by 5 p.m. the next day. And so the time frames are a little bit more unpredictable when it comes to litigation. So it's really important that you start talking to paralegals in different types of roles and learn what their lifestyle is like. I mean, are they a transactional paralegal? Do they do litigation? And what is their lifestyle like? What is their compensation like? I think you'll find, in one thing I really didn't understand when I was going to law school is that there's a huge disparity in lawyer pay. And I would assume that that might be the case with paralegal pay as well. So there are some types of lawyers that make the kind of money that you think lawyers make, where they make lots and lots of money. And then there's some lawyers that make hardly anything at all. And we've talked about it in the United States, how it's getting much harder for lawyers who serve individual clients to make a living. If you're serving somebody individually on a family law matter or on a real estate matter, anything where you're serving individuals as opposed to organizations, individuals typically can't afford to pay super high hourly rates. So, it's getting harder and harder for people who serve individuals in order to provide legal services at a competitive rate. So you might not make as much money. And therefore, if your lawyer isn't making that much money and your firm isn't making that much money, you may not be paid that much in comparison to other types of areas. So, I know for criminal law matters, for example, like if you're working for somebody who does traffic tickets and, small infractions like that, Typically those lawyers don't make as much as somebody who works for a big corporate firm that does, maybe mergers and acquisitions work or something like that. In the United States, you can actually look up these numbers. If you are interested, I'm sure that there's probably some equivalent in Canada where you can find salary information. But to give you an idea of how much that disparity may be, for first-year attorneys, they do a survey of all first-year attorneys and how much they make in the United States coming straight out of law school. And on the low end, attorneys are making about $48,000 to about $84,000 a year, US. So that's, about 70% of all graduates in the US are making in that range. And then on the high end, like 10% or 15% of graduates in the US are making $190,000 coming out of law school. And that's what our largest law firms pay, our most competitive law firms. And so I wish I knew that there was a huge disparity, because that may mean that you want to, connect with a lot of professionals in lots of different areas and understand, what is the salary range for someone working in this area. Now, if you're connecting with professionals, I wouldn't just ask them, how much money do you make? Because I think that's a little too abrasive, but there's a way to ask that question. You can ask them, what is the salary range for someone in this type of profession, and ask them for really junior paralegals as well as very experienced paralegals. What would be the expected range for somebody who's really experienced? What is the expected range for somebody who's more junior? And then that makes that question a little bit more gentle. So, but I think it's really important for you to start connecting with professionals as soon as you can to learn about their career paths and their lifestyle, because it may really change your own trajectory. And when you're connecting with professionals, it's important that you build those relationships long term. Don't just think in the short term. Often I find that students, college students especially, they'll reach out to me, they'll ask me, hey, can I learn about a little bit about your practice? And they'll spend an hour grilling me on the phone and they'll disappear into the ether and I'll never hear from them again. And that's really sad because I usually wonder what happened to you after that. So I think it's really important that you realize when you're a really junior person, it's up to you to help drive that relationship forward until you get to a more senior point where you have more value to deliver to that person. And then they'll most likely start reaching out to you more. But when you're very junior, it's your job to drive your relationships with professionals. And so when you connect with these professionals, there's a couple of things that you can do to make sure that they understand that you value their time and that you want to drive that relationship forward. So and this is something that my mentor had to teach me. None of it came naturally to me, by the way. So my mentor taught me that when you connect with professionals, when you're asking them for what's called an informational interview, I had no idea what an informational interview was, but these two magical words, informational interview, signal to people that you're not actually asking for a job. And then it makes them more likely to open up to you to say, oh, okay, I don't have to give you a job, but I can at least just tell you about myself. They're much more willing to do that usually. So so you ask them for an informational interview. And during that time, you'll ask them questions about their career paths and how did they get from, where they started to where they are now. And in that interview, make sure to ask them questions that naturally lead to follow-up, that naturally lead to you being able to contact them again. That's the key. So ask them for advice that you can take during that interview that you can use to follow up with them later. So while you're talking to them, ask them, are there organizations that I can join to learn more about your practice area? Are there publications that I should read or subscribe to? Are there, industry magazines or industry blogs or anything that I should be following to learn more about your practice area? Are there other connections that you would recommend for me to talk to? Can you introduce me to more people that might have different career paths than you? And those types of things will naturally lead to you having to take some sort of action after the meeting. Then you go take that action and you report back to them and you say, hey, I joined this industry organization, or I read this article that you sent to me, or I connected with that person that you introduced me to, and this is all the great information that I found out. Thank you so much for sending that to me. And by showing them that you are willing to take action on their advice, they're much more likely to continue helping you in the future. So that's really, really important. Make sure that you take really good notes in any call that you have with any professional, because this happens to me all the time. I'll meet with somebody, I'll sleep on it, and the next day I don't remember a single thing that I've said to them. And so I have to go back and review my notes. And so my suggestion is, after your meeting, take a look at your notes, immediately send them a thank you email saying, thank you so much for connecting with me. In case it's helpful to you, here are my notes from the call, and put in not just your notes of what they said, but also put in any action items you decided on. So if they gave you advice to go join an organization or attend an event or anything like that, put those action items in the bottom. Say, these are our action items and next steps. And then if you have any questions that you forgot to ask, this happens to me all the time. I'm like, oh, I wish I asked them this question. That's the opportunity where you can say, hey, you mentioned something during our meeting. Can you clarify this for me? Or I had another question that I wanted to ask you, and then drop it there. So the recap email will help that lawyer or the professional or whoever you've reached out to realize, like, oh, they did listen to me. They valued my time. They're appreciative, and they're somebody who follows up and follows through, and they're diligent. And these are all good qualities to have in a professional. So they're much more likely in the future to recommend you to someone else or to help you going forward, because they know you're the kind of person that will deliver. And so you take these notes and you send them these thank you emails, and it's a much more effective way to write a thank you email than just saying, hey, thank you for your time, and then ghosting them and never speaking to them again. So make sure that you send those thank you emails, and then after a month or two, after you've already done whatever it is you promised to do in the email, reply back to that email and say, hey, remember we connected about a month ago, and you gave me all this great advice about going to join this organization or reading this article or whatever it is, and I did it, and this is what happened, and do you have any other advice for me that I could take? And so that way you can use these thank you emails as a constant way to keep driving that relationship forward. And all of this can be done virtually. So none of this has to be done in person, which is great for COVID times. So I think that that's really important to note, that you can still build really strong relationships even during these times when you can't be face to face. So don't be too afraid to reach out to people in online mediums. Use LinkedIn, use all the tools that are available to you. And if your school has, alumni or people that they can connect you to, reach out, and try to find alumni of your school so that you can talk to them. It's always better when you have a warm connection. If you can say, oh, I saw that you're an alumni of my school or something like that, then they're much more likely to talk to you. Or if you can get somebody to introduce you to them. So if you see that you have a mutual connection on LinkedIn and that person can introduce you to them, go ahead and ask them for that introduction. I think the other really important thing to do that is really hard for students to understand is to make sure that you know exactly what to ask from that lawyer or from that professional. If you go in and you ask them for a job, it's an easy no if they don't have a job. And then they'd have no more obligation to you. Like, no is a complete sentence, so they can say that and move on. And so if you ask them for an informational interview, that is a different story. Then they can, then they're more likely to engage with you. If you ask them for advice, they're more likely to engage with you. So I think it's important to know that when you're connecting with professionals, it's just as much about your approach as it is about, who you are. I think that most students are really afraid, like, at the very beginning, that they're a nobody and no one will want to talk to them. And that's just not true. I mean, all of us have been there at one point. Attorneys, especially, like, we know how hard that road is for people to go through all that schooling to become an attorney. And so typically, there are a lot of professionals that are willing to talk to you if you're just honest with them and say, hey, I'm at the beginning of my journey and I really don't know anything about this. Would you be willing to share your story with me? That is a lot more genuine to me than students who just come right out and ask me for a job. And then if I don't have a job, then they're like, oh, well, can I learn a little bit about you? And I think it goes better to ask the attorney for the informational interview first, build that relationship up. And then eventually, if you ask for the job, they already know who you are and they've had some interactions with you. And if you've been diligent in these interactions with them, they're much more likely to have a favorable opinion of you and they'll probably give you that job. But I hope this is helpful at all. John Paul, I know you said that they just learned about informational interviews. So tell me if I repeated anything that they've already talked about.
No, I think more. I think they were learning from getting information from a client type of perspective. But I did know what you mentioned in terms of some, a don't there, because I get that someone will add me on LinkedIn and before I hit accept, it's already like a pre-populated. I'm ready to provide some work for you. Do you have a job? And I said not at this moment. Then I never hear from them again. So what are some other don'ts when trying to network with those in the legal professional to avoid doing that? Maybe you've seen and I've shared with the students that you're mentoring to avoid repeating.
If you're connecting with people specifically on LinkedIn, don't just send a blank connection request. I think people are just getting way too desensitized to that. And so if you're just hitting that connect button, like it's just, your fingers on autopilot and you're just clicking, connect, that's just not going to work. I think that it's really important to do a little bit of research on the person that you're wanting to connect with. Really, one great feature that LinkedIn has is that it has an activity section. So you can go to every person's profile and see how active is this person. If they have never posted anything ever, there will be no activity there. So you will know that that person uses LinkedIn as a glorified resume, and they probably are not likely to engage there. However, if you go to the activity section and you see, wow, they've commented on a bunch of other people's posts and they write their own articles, they write their own posts, they do a whole bunch of stuff on LinkedIn, that person is active on social media. So they're more likely to respond to you. So you should always go to their profile, check their, do they have a featured section? If they have a featured section, that probably means that they know how to use LinkedIn better. If they have an activity section and they're very, very active, they're much more likely to talk to you. And so go look at their activity section. Go do a little bit of, cyber stalking and see what in the world do they comment on? What do they like to talk about? See what their comments on other people's posts are, and you'll get a sense of what their interests are. And so if they're posting their own information, you can always go and comment on that post. And if you comment on their content first, it shows them that you have an interest in them. And then reach out and say, hey, I saw your post the other day and it was really great. I got a lot of great advice from it or whatever it is. And I'd love to connect with you. And can I, conduct an informational interview with you? Will you give me 15, 30 minutes of your time on Zoom? And we'll chat together. And I think they're a lot more likely to open up to you once they see like, oh, this person has been, seeing what my content is, and they're familiar with who I am. I used to get law students that would commit this faux pas all the time. Whenever I would go and interview law students for internships, they would glance over my profile for 5 seconds and they would see she's an intellectual property lawyer. And they would come in and they would be like, I am so excited to work for your firm and do intellectual property work. I am so interested in patent law, and I've done all of these patents. And I'm like, great, we don't do any patent law. Like, if you researched anything about my firm, you would see that we only do trademark and copyright law. And, and then the student would be like, oh, huh. And so you don't want to do that. Make sure you spend enough time really researching what do they actually do, and make sure that your interests are aligned with theirs, and then reach out. The other thing, I think, it's really professional of you to do. And I would say, I wouldn't necessarily discount you if you didn't do it, but it always impresses me when I see it, is when they get into the informational interview, they'll actually say, their elevator pitch. So the student will actually start off kind of controlling the room. So they'll say, hi, my name is Angie. I go to this university and I'm in a paralegal program, and I'm really trying to learn more about the legal profession. And I just want to ask you a few questions today, if you don't mind, about, XYZ. And that is always a much better setup than you just get into the room and you just say, hi, okay, I'm here. Like, give me all your knowledge and wisdom. Like, I think that that's the other thing that I see a lot of, is students don't necessarily try to control and drive the conversation. So it's always much more impressive when they do. And you can also set up a time constraint. So you can say, how much time do you have to spend with me today? So I know how many questions to ask you, and what's appropriate. Because some students, they'll pepper me with questions for a straight hour, and I'm like, I've got to run. But if the student asks me ahead of time, do you have 30 minutes or do you have an hour or whatever, then I know how much time they want to ask me questions, and it's much more professional. So usually I would start out with asking, what is their time constraint? Do I have 30 minutes? Do I have an hour? Whatever it is, so that you know how to drive that relationship forward. So, yeah.
And what else in terms of maybe on the interview? What's some tips there if you are at that point where you're looking at either an internship or a first sort of position? How do you get more comfortable during the interview there to really highlight the strengths of what you've done in law school, or why you'd be a good fit for that firm? Like what advice in terms of getting through that initial stage that you can offer?
Well, in an informational interview or a job interview? Because I would say I would almost never in an informational interview end it with asking for a job. It just spoils the whole thing. Like, I just wouldn't do it. I mean, I think that you have to ask for some sort of follow-up meeting in order to ask that. I would always do what I suggested in asking for advice, take that advice, follow up with them. And then in the second follow-up, then say, oh, and by the way, I'm looking for internships. And if there's anything that you ever hear of or know of any opportunities, please send them along my way. And if you have any openings at your firm, I would love to do anything that I can to get any experience, whether it's, this is the other thing that I've seen more common of. So right now, a lot of law firms are in uncertain times. They don't know what's going to happen for them financially for the next even 30 days for some people. So it's really difficult for them to make long-term hiring decisions. So if you're looking for a long-term salaried position where they pay you a certain amount, that's all but gone away. But I've seen a lot more students, especially law students, getting much more creative and saying, I want the experience, whatever kind of experience you're willing to give me. If that's a project-based or even a short contract base. So if you want to try me out for a month or two, see what you think. If you want me to just work on a specific project, see what you think. If I can help you do anything that's even non-billable, law students, like, we can help blog for attorneys. Lots of attorneys aren't social media savvy. So if you have an interest and you want to, help do social media stuff for them, you can always volunteer, hey, can I write an article with you about this particular, practice area? Law firms always have to do marketing about the types of matters that they handle. So what they'll do is they'll write articles about different upcoming cases in their practice area, or trends that they're seeing. And so they'll write about these things in order to tell their prospective clients, we work on these kinds of matters. And so all of that work, though, typically is not billable. They cannot charge a client for doing a marketing blog. And so you can help write for law firms to do that kind of work. So, if you're interested in trying to learn about a practice area, that's a great thing to volunteer for. Hey, can I help you write a summary of these cases? Or can I help you write about an upcoming issue? And that'll give you some ways to work with that paralegal or that attorney or whoever it is. And so they'll become more familiar with your work product. And, likely they'll build a better relationship with you. And then they'll be more likely to hire you for something substantive. So, I think that you can be creative in what you propose right now to get your foot in the door. It's all about just kind of cracking that door open, whether it's working on an article for them or doing social media work for them, or, even helping people create LinkedIn content. One of my law students is actually creating LinkedIn content for an attorney that we mutually know. And she helps write all of their posts and all of the stuff that they put on LinkedIn. So, just looking, what advice can you give me on how do I improve my marketing on social media? You have 15,000 followers. That's amazing. You have 15,000 followers on LinkedIn. Wow. One thing is LinkedIn. Oh, Facebook. Oh, interesting. Okay, so always it's about content, creating content that provides value. So my suggestion to you is to start writing about the things that your prospective employers, prospective clients care about. So if you're generating advice for, other people in the industry about a particular practice area, that's always a great way to talk about things. Or networking advice, as a student, you're out there connecting with lots of other people. One of the students that I mentor, she started doing summaries whenever she would talk to an attorney on LinkedIn. She'd do a little post and say, today I connected with this attorney and he gave me all this great advice. And she would put a few bullet points about the advice that he gave her. And she kind of started like a networking series so that people could start getting to know the people that she was talking to. And so one of the things that you can do to drive value for people, no matter what stage you're at, students always think that they don't have anything to offer people, and that's totally false. There's so many things you have to offer people. First, you can offer support. So if your connections are writing articles, if they're speaking at events, if they're throwing an event, if they're doing anything like that, you can offer them support in some sort of way. You can help promote that event, you can help share that article, you can help do something that drives value in what they're doing. And that always delivers value to them. So that's one thing you can do. You can always provide encouragement. So we as professionals, most of the things that we work on is very high stakes, and we can have, very difficult jobs. And so always having, a word of encouragement whenever you see that person is struggling or whenever you see that person is really tired, it's always nice if you can provide some sort of encouragement. Connections. You might not be important right now, but you're probably connecting with a lot of important people. And if you help them connect with each other, that can be really valuable. You never know when, I've had students who connected me with attorneys who ended up coming onto the podcast. I've had attorneys, all sorts of things. You can connect with lots of other people. And so if you connect your connections to each other, that drives value for them. It helps them grow their networks. So there's lots of things that you can offer, no matter what stage of your experience that you're in. Just always look for what value can you deliver. That's my advice.
Perfect. Is there anyone else with any questions? I know I saw a hand up earlier, but
yeah, I'll ask away. Feel free to jump on camera and ask too. I know that can be intimidating, but go ahead, or ask in the chat box. I'm happy to answer there. So I'm trying to watch it, but Yeah, I mean, I think some of the really challenging things for me in my very, very early career was just keeping track of all the people that I was meeting with. So make sure that you also keep a running list. So my students use all sorts of online tools now to do this. I used to use like straight up an address book, and now I use like a personal CRM. Has anybody ever heard of Notion? Notion SO. It's like a personal um, organizational tool. And so check it out. It's free. So it's always good for students that it's free. And you can create your own like personal relationship management database in there so that you can see who all am I connecting with. Keep track of the people that you're connecting with, how often you've connected with them. You can add columns in there, and one of the columns might be the last date that you connected with that person. Then another column might be all the dates that you connected with that person. And you want both, because one column you want to be able to sort by so you can see when's the last time I talked to this person and who's falling to the bottom. And then the next column that has all the dates you've spoken to them helps you just look visually how strong your relationship is with them. So like if you've connected with that person 8 times, you know, okay, that's a little bit stronger than somebody I met just the other day, right? So you can just eyeball it that way. So make sure you keep track of all your contacts. So usually I create like a spreadsheet that has their name, their LinkedIn profile link, so I can easily go find them afterwards, their law firm bio link if they have one, any other information or notes from our call, the dates that we contacted each other, and all of that information so that you can have it all in one glance. As far as offering digital marketing assistance, is there a need for such assistance? Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of attorneys need it. I'm sure a lot of paralegals probably need it too, because like many attorneys are technologically very far behind. I'm sad to say, but many of us are, and I think that we spend so much of our time focused on the nuts and bolts of learning the law that we don't spend a lot of time keeping up with technology. We don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to market ourselves. I think running a law firm really is running a business, and a lot of attorneys aren't as good at business as they should be. So, and we always need, business development. So I think that it's always, fair to offer that kind of work if you have experience in it, or even if you don't have experience in it. I mean, I know law students who have just started writing articles for attorneys and then eventually, could put that on their resume, but they had never done that before. So.
I think we have a question from Bryce. Bryce, you're gonna unmute now.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I didn't realize I was hot micing. But yeah, so you mentioned earlier about tapping connections that you might have and the process behind that. I was wondering if you could hammer that out any more. Because I have residual people that I know from real estate who I know eventually would be great to get in touch with. But I know right now I'm kind of holding an empty plate in terms of what I can do there. So I'm taking some of your points that you mentioned and going to action on that a little bit. My real question though is have you ever had the situation where something was very hot, like you helped them make like $3 million, and then you ended up not talking to them for a while, blah, 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 blah. 3 years go by. And then suddenly now I'm in my situation now where I'm in a paralegal and I don't necessarily want to like directly call them and say, now you owe me connections. But I know there's a mechanism in there that I can tap, and I'm wondering how to reignite that. That's really what I'm asking about.
I mean, it's literally as simple as first, you just have to reestablish the connection. So you just reach out to them and say, hey, it's been a while. I haven't talked to you. I just wanted to catch up, see how things are going. I mean, times are crazy right now for everybody. So I feel like you can use COVID as an example, as an excuse to reach out to people and just say, hey, I'm just checking in on you. How are things going? And, start reestablishing that connection again. And then, tell them what you've been up to. Yeah, wanted to give you an update about my life, and I'm pursuing this paralegal degree now. And, I'm starting to really try to build professional connections in the field. Would love to see if you recommend anybody that I can talk to.
That line is something I was missing. Very good point. Thank you. I like that. I appreciate that.
Sure. Anybody else? Ask away. Don't be afraid. It's hard on these Zoom calls because I can't see everybody. I can only see.
So that's one of the things I think to get used to there is you don't always see all the faces there. So if there are no other questions, and certainly if someone has questions afterwards, they can certainly use the advice you gave and reach out to them, reach out to you.
Here, I'll put my LinkedIn in here just in case you're not connected to me somehow, and then feel free to reach out. Yeah, but yeah, go ahead if you have any questions and ask me.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, then perhaps Anjie, thank you so much for joining us here today. Perhaps you could end with some final pieces of advice for students here looking at needing that mentorship piece and what they can do to better establish that in a better network. And perhaps you can share as well with some of the amazing initiatives that I see that constantly are popping up on my newsfeed there on LinkedIn that you're doing. I know the podcast is relatively new as well. And the Tuesdays and Thursdays there on Zoom, and how people can access that.
Yeah. So as far as mentoring goes, I would say, so that's even a step above connecting with people for informational interviews and everything. And you're not going to be able to establish a mentoring relationship until you've done the preliminary work of just connecting with people. So step one is just connecting with them. Then step two is building up those relationships. And so when you're doing these informational interviews, ask yourself, was that person really helpful? Did I really like talking to them? Did I feel comfortable talking to them? If so, you want to make a note someplace that, hey, this is a person that I want to drive this relationship forward. And then you would spend your time trying to, push that forward a little bit more. Ask them for more advice. You may not ever ask them just straight out, will you be my mentor? Like that might not ever happen. And that's totally okay. There's lots of different mentors that you may have in your life. There's formal mentors, there's informal mentors. I've had both. There's mentoring programs like ours where you can actually find a mentor that has said, yes, I want to be a mentor. But there's also plenty of ways that you can just identify out of your circle of all the people that you're connecting with who might be a good informal mentor for you. And when you connect with these people and ask them for advice and follow up with them and keep showing them, hey, you appreciate their advice, you're taking their advice. And you know what? Tell them even if you took their advice and it didn't work. It always helps me when my mentees tell me that, like, hey, I took your advice, but this didn't work out the way that I thought that it was going to work out. Is there something else that I can do or a different approach that I can take? And then it helps me recalibrate that advice for anybody else in the future. So it's valuable to me as a mentor when you do that. So, when you're taking their advice, tell them, what happened afterwards. Like I said, if you just never tell them what happened, then it's like, okay, well, don't know if they did anything with it, don't know if it benefited them. And so use that to drive your relationships forward. And when you're a mentee, it's really important that you also look for ways that you can show appreciation to your mentor. And you don't have to give them something like a gift or anything like that, but just literally just writing a thank you note every once in a while, a nice thank you card in the mail, something more personal will show that mentor that you've given, your time to them. So do that. And when you get good advice, give it back, okay? Give it back to someone behind you. There is always somebody who has less information than you, that you can mentor them. It's important that you give back to other people. I always tell my mentees, if you're enjoying this program and you connect with mentors that give you really valuable advice, go find someone that you can mentor and go give that advice to them, because it's important that we continue making paths for other people. It doesn't help anybody if you just take that advice, run with it, and then never share it with anyone else. So make sure that you're always passing that information back to other people. There's always somebody behind you. It doesn't matter what level of experience you're at. If you're a college student, there's a high school student behind you who's interested in becoming a paralegal that one day you can help them. If you're already a working professional, there's people who are students who need your help. So always find a way to give back that advice. And then as far as all the things that we're doing, yes, we have tons of resources available for people who are interested in getting into law. I have a post series on LinkedIn called The Real Lawyers of LinkedIn, where we highlight lawyers that you can follow every week in different practice areas so that you can connect with different people and learn more about different practice areas. We also have these networking events. We have a virtual networking happy hour that we do every other Friday. And actually this Friday is one of them. And so you can come and attend that event where you can connect with law students, pre-law students, lawyers, all sorts of legal professionals. And then we also do our Zoom meetups on Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon Central Time. So you can attend all of those as well. And then our podcast is actually about the anonymous stories of real lawyers. So we keep them anonymous so that they can share really personal things in their life about setbacks that they've had, about challenges that they've had, about discrimination that they've faced, so that you can really hear, like, lawyers are humans too. We all have challenges at the beginning. It's all really hard. And none of this is natural for people to figure out. Like, I think students always feel so far behind. They always feel like, I'm so at the very, very beginning and I don't know anything. And it's like, you know what? Everybody was there at that point. You have to get over that mindset and you have to just say, okay, I'm at a point that's brand new. I just need to learn a little bit more about this and, keep progressing. It's more about progress than it is about perfection, right? So, and you go through this cycle of learning for every single thing you've ever done in your life. You're at a point, at some point where you're unconsciously ignorant, where you don't even know what you don't know. Then you get to this point of conscious ignorance where you're like, now I know that I don't know this. And then eventually, as you're starting to learn it, you get to a point of unconscious competence, like, oh, I didn't even realize that I'm starting to actually learn this. And then finally, you get to a point of conscious competence. I know that I can do this. I do it well. And then you'll discover some brand new aspect of that thing and you're back to the beginning. And so you go over this cycle over and over and over. And don't be afraid to go back to step one, just keep on going. You have to keep going. I always think it's wild that, my law students, they get to a point where they're like, oh my gosh, there's this brand new thing and I just can't learn it. And I'm like, just think of all the things you've ever learned in your life. You literally went through every single stage for every single thing, from learning how to write to learning how to read to learning how to type. At some point you didn't know how to do it, right? And if you would have just sat at that point and said, nope, that's just too much for me to learn, you would have never mastered it. So just start somewhere and build incrementally to get to that place. Just start with one connection. Go build a relationship with one connection, one person. And really, all it takes is one or two really influential people in your life to completely change everything. It took me 50 cold calls to get to one lawyer that was willing to mentor me, and I struck gold with that guy. He taught me so much about everything I didn't know. And then, when I was in law school, I had another really influential mentor who was the person who ended up basically getting me my first job. And that made all the difference. And, I've had a couple of those mentors in my career now that have been so influential, but it took me a long time to get to them. I might have spoken to hundreds of people before I found them. So, don't be afraid to keep on building those connections. You never know who that next connection is going to lead you to. And you never know when that connection is going to be useful either. It's a long game. You're going to hopefully be working, in the profession for a long time. So don't, cut off these connections too early.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Angie, for taking the time and joining us. It's phenomenal, all the things you're doing, and it's providing a lot of support there. I can see for law students all over, and especially with Zoom right now. You can reach larger audiences, so you don't have to be coming to an event like a wine and cheese type of event in a specific location anymore. And I think the opportunities are endless. So thanks so much, Angie, again, and thank you everyone for joining us. And take care.
You're very welcome. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, JP.
Bye.